to just report on the review that I did. It took an immeasurable amount of time, actually, bigger than Ben-Hur, but then I tend to take on things that are bigger than Ben-Hur, so that's the way it is. So that the review I did all of last year. So I wanted to go through some of the basics. The nice thing about this, of course, is that Jim has been involved, Wendy's been involved, and Carolyn's been involved in these Vegwatch projects. So are you still here, Carolyn? I can't see you on the screen, so.
Yeah, look, I'm still here. I've just turned off the video. It just helps get better reception if I'm not streaming video as well.
Just so that I know that you're there too. That's
yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Sarah.
Excellent. So the monitoring, of course, is identified around adaptive management, which has become a very big thing, and I'm probably telling you to suck eggs here, but with the idea that monitoring and research is absolutely critical to working out what you should be doing on the ground. And one of the biggest things, I think, is to turn it around from, and you guys have demonstrated it today, is you've got amazing observation in terms of what you've seen happening, but the important thing is to turn it into something that is quantifiable and reportable, and so that you can actually see what's happening. And if you do that, then you can compare it to other sites, so you start to get the insights. But it also lends credence to what is actually what you're doing and what other people are doing, and getting the funding for the things that we need and how we need to do it. So monitoring is absolutely critical to achieving change, conservation change on the ground, or in this case, conservation. It's tied in very, very closely with research, because one of the things about monitoring that it doesn't do is that where it tells you what is happening, it doesn't necessarily tell you why it's happening. You can't necessarily apply a causative, a sort of cause to why it's happening with monitoring, because there's too many variables involved. And that's where research comes in, because research picks up the question to say, okay, I want to find out why that's happening. So it's absolutely integral, and you can see from the three pictures that I've got, which is all the same site. This is at Balanmara in Yarralamla, and in the first one, can you see my pointer? Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so in this first one, 2014, you can see the woody weeds here. This area was absolutely thick with woody weeds. And then they were cleared. You got a fairly dry year following, and this is the sort of after the clearing, and then a wetter year, and you can see how much the undergrowth has changed. So you've got to kind of work your way through these changes that are happening to work out what's important behind all of that. So the monitoring program really was set up for two particular reasons. One is to see whether people can apply what they're doing on the ground at their site and say, is the management that I'm doing achieving the desired outcomes in my site? And Mike made the comment about it being, you know, that we too often concentrate on the means to an end. In other words, the management is okay, we're going to do the management, that's what's important. But what we really need to know is what's the end part of this. And then by linking with other programs, then you can actually start to look at the question, is the management achieving the desired outcomes across the landscape? And that's really, to me, the absolute core of why this is important, is you're getting this personal picture, but then you can see this large picture out there as well. This is the photos here, a picture of out at Carolyn's place, where there was, Wally Bell was involved in running some cool burns. The top picture is before the burn. The two bottom pictures, the one on the left-hand side is the plot that was burnt, and on the right-hand side, the plot that wasn't burnt. Now, they both look very, very similar, and this, of course, was 2018, so very dry. And I went back there in 2019. But what's important is that after that burn, that plot that was burnt, where it hadn't been, it didn't meet the criteria before that as the threatened box gum woodland. After the burn, it did. So, you know, it's really the critical thing is actually what is happening on the ground. Now, that was just 1 year after the burn. Now we have to see whether it maintains that sort of diversity and that level in the longer term. So that's really why we're doing this. How we're doing it is it's all in the same way. Those little splotches, by the way, on my plot drawing are supposed to be trees, just in case you didn't know. Why would you know? They should be green, shouldn't they? Boy. Okay. So we collect all of the data in a plot and in a transect, either within the, well, it can be usually within the plot itself. So the plot, if it's got trees and vegetation over 2 metres, it's collected within the 20 by 50 metre. If it's only in vegetation under 2 metres, then you just set up the 20 by 20 and you measure all the vegetation in the less than 2 metres within that 20 by 20. And what we're doing is collecting the data, and the data that we collect is on species richness, so that's just writing down all the species and that they're present. But then can also do an abundance estimate as well, and I emphasise that that's estimate, and I'll come back to that later. And species cover, also structural diversity and habitat diversity. So this is Vegwatch up till this point. Also photo monitoring, which is really important to sort of help to explain what's going on, explain the data, and then observations of condition and management. And then the data that are collected are used to calculate indices of condition. So since 2011, so I counted up on my fingers as we were talking, and that's actually so we've got actually up to 10 years of data, counting 2000, is 11, 12, yes, 19. We've got 9 years of data in some sites. So that's a pretty good record actually. And but there's a lot of sites. There was a whole flurry because of the cool burn sites and some others that were only set up in 2017, early 18. So we don't have a lot of data on those, but there's been a lot of programs that have been running now for up to 9 years anyway, counting 2019. So 15 groups have been involved. The management on the ground has included burning, woody weed control, herbaceous weed control, revegetation, and what I haven't got in there because it's a complicated one is no management, because no management, if it's deliberate, can also is a form of management, of course. It's different from no management when that is just neglect. All of the sites but one are managed for conservation, but like Carolyn's, it's not all within reserves. There can be private reserves, or like the cemetery where conservation had become a key matter in that cemetery itself. So the other one that I'm saying wasn't managed for conservation, maybe I'm wrong, Wendy, is the property and that where the woody weed control occurred. So I presume that grazing is an ongoing management form in that site.
Yes, I don't think there's much management going on by the owners. They now have 4 horses or something in there. No,
so conservation is not of interest to them. And I presume it's also part of one of the ones that you were talking about, that was part of that Broome project.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. But interestingly, Sarah, what you're saying about the overall plan, I can see how that whole project fell down because we were concentrated on getting rid of the woody weeds, whereas we weren't concentrated on the final outcome, which would have involved revegetation and a whole lot of other stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll come back to that at the very end about changes, actually, of how I want this to or how I see this can work in the future as well, related to that sort of thing. I want to make a point about that, but I'll leave that till then. So there was a mix of different vegetation associations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different vegetation associations, but effectively, structurally, they fall into grassland, grassy woodland, shrubby woodland and forest. The greatest number of sites were grassland and grassy woodland, and of course they're the ones that we've got the greatest amount of concern for. In brackets is the number of sites. So some sites had multiple plots. A lot of sites only had one single plot, which is a bit of a downfall, and I'll come back to that later. So I did a review. The idea of the review was that it was about jolly time that we pulled the data together to actually see what it was saying and to provide feedback to participants and others, to actually identify what come out of it, so that would see how we could to guide management, to ensure that the data went into a metadata as sort of we had the data available so it could be reviewed with a greater amount of data. And then to see how maybe we could change Vegwatch, because it's been crawling around, it's been sort of crawling along without an awful lot of support for people on the ground, and we need to sell it basically to make it continue in the future. Otherwise, it's everyone's just going to be lose it or whatever. So we really need to just have a jolly good look at the data and see what it was saying, see if it was useful. Oh, I meant to take that one out. I'm going to just go straight over that. It's not worth. The only thing that I was going to say in that slide was we've got a database. So all of the data is in a database and allows us to pull it out. A lot of the indices that we actually identify do need extra calculations. That's another matter in terms of how long it takes the amount of time it takes to get some of the data together. Needs to be looked at as well. So one of the things that we needed to start with in any sort of citizen science project, you have to, well, any project, you actually have to have a look and see how accurate the data is. So is it actually going to tell us what we wanted to tell it, or is it leading us on a wild goose chase? So the three key questions in all of that was to actually look at whether the methods were robust. Were the data collected by the citizen science robust and comparable? So in other words, was it accurate? And were the data significantly influenced by seasonal condition? And I'll go to that one first, because the pictures are there at Aranda bushland. If you can see the enormous changes that can happen over the years, purely in this case, because they do some herbaceous weed management, but nothing major has happened in that site. And you can see the influence of the annuals in 2016 and to a slightly lesser extent in 2014. And you can, that overriding, you know, is our data that we're collecting actually coming in behind some of that, if you like, noise of those annual species and picking up what's going on. So going back to the first one, the methods robust. The first one was was really, we couldn't test it with the data as much as actually looking at it from the point of view of, well, we're using methods that are used elsewhere in Australia. They're definitely used locally within the ACT and New South Wales, so we're covering the same sort of bases there. And you have to trust that probably by now we know the best methods. So we've kind of put a tick to that. The data collected by citizen scientists. The way that I actually looked at this question was to include a lot of data that I got from colleagues in ACT government that they'd been collecting in sites, some of which overlapped with the sites that the data are being collected by the Vegwatch people, and put that in with the mix, and then did various different statistical analyses on that to actually have a look and see if they stuck out on a limb. Were the Vegwatch data a lot different from that? And I also went through the process of making a judgmental decision on people's level of experience, and gave scores to people's level of experience, and I found no difference between any of the data in that broad sense. So I was comfortable and happy, and have and my colleagues in ACT government are comfortable and happy that our data are valid and useful. And in fact, going back to that, one of those things that I wanted to get the data together is I've already handed over all the data up to 2018 to them, and they're including it in their analyses, which is a wonderful outcome actually. So I probably should explain a little bit about what I mean by primary drivers, secondary drivers and stresses. And the drivers are really the things that are, well, they're the things that are sitting underneath and affecting how changes are occurring. So things that I found out through various analyses was vegetation structure was extremely important. Past land uses and disturbance were very important, and seasonal variation was extremely important. And we all know about this, but this gave a chance to actually quantify those sorts of drivers. So secondary drivers that then came on top of this was biomass manipulation. By that I mean a fairly high level type stuff like burning, grazing, mowing, and they're the main three. So the main three sort of forms of actually reducing or increasing the biomass, the herbage mass, and revegetation. Revegetation can be, of course, quite a massive biomass manipulation if it's trees and shrubs, not so much if it's herbaceous species. And then the things that are really affecting the ecosystem stressor, or the ecosystem stresses, as we were talking about, was the weeds in particular, and soil moisture availability. So the next thing I wanted to do was to actually have a look at, well, what are the indices that provide the most useful information on changes in condition. So this is a principal components analysis, and what it has shown up really is that there's all of the measures of native cover here. So whether that's thermiter cover, native grass, grass cover, native ground cover generally, and down here bare earth cover, are all very similar to each other in terms of what they actually tell us. Then there's a couple of things that are of lesser, the longer the arrows, by the way, the more influence it has on how the sites were grouped. So these ones have a lesser influence, but native fall cover is important. Down here you've got native richness. So there's a whole lot of measures of native richness, which is all of your natives. It's the indicator species used for in woodlands. It's sort of some of the other measures of richness. Across here, introduced species, should have put cover there. So introduced species cover is perennial, introduced and annual introduced, very similar, but I'll come back to that. And then introduced species richness. So these really came out as the most important factors to actually be looking at in terms of describing how condition changes. So what that said to me was that instead of saying, okay, your native species are doing this, and so therefore your introduced species are probably doing the same. Well, you're not. They may be going in different directions, as these are on the screen. They may be going in different directions. So introduced species may be responding differently than your natives. So you need to be actually getting a condition measure of both of those groups. In terms of describing what actually happened within the plots, and this is Ballinmara, so that's the one I showed you that where the woody weed control occurred. Oh, this has moved. Sorry, I can't. I just hang on. Where do I go? Back. Yeah, that's in the wrong. That red line is in the wrong place. I made it bigger. But just to explain what we did was, or what I did was to work out a level of variance that you would expect in these sites. I'm not going to go into the science, would be here forever. But to actually say that, okay, there's a level of variance that occurs that is partly to do with the seasons, and it's just really partly what you expect to find over a period of time. So that's within the green the green rectangles, and that was done for each of the different structural groups. Shrubby woodland I ended up putting in with grassy woodland because I didn't have enough replicates, but it was to take a number of the good sites and to say, okay, well, this is the variation that the good sites show. So any variation outside that is what's important. So you'll see the first one, native species richness, this didn't really change, and you could say that that's remained stable. That red line indicates when the disturbance happened, or the management, in this case the woody weed control. But I've done it again. That red line here should actually be back over here. So it happened in 2014. So down here, you can see that that's annual introduced was actually lower before the lower than the variability, the expected variability before the burn, but then it increased considerably. And you can see here it's got the dotted line is the seasonal, the soil moisture availability, and in 2016 it followed it. So it went into a bit of a roll after it started to reflect very, very closely the seasonal conditions, and to some extent the perennial did as well. So the sort of conclusion out of this is that proportion of native cover, the native ground cover, actually took a hit after the woody weed control. I presume because there's more light on the ground and probably a bit more transpiration. But it seems to be levelling out, but it just shows how long you need to be monitoring to actually get a picture of what's going on. So I did this with each of the plots to actually measure what was going on, and that allowed us to say whether sites were in good condition, so if they were sort of sitting above certain levels, good with some concerns, moderate or poor, and then the trend. So were they improving, were they stable, or variable, or whether they were declining, or whether they're unknown. The unknowns were really related to the data, that the monitoring hadn't gone on for long enough. And so I've got the number of plots that were in good condition. What's important here is that ACT government aren't actually measuring very many sites that are in moderate or poor condition, but they're the ones that you really want to bring up, because the ones that are good, you sort of have a sense that they're probably relatively resilient, but it's the moderate and poor that you want to bring up. So what's important is actually what's happening to those sites. Down here is also interesting, and these are again, I'll take that back to, this is what is happening, but we don't know why. So even though it's happening in burnt plots, it's not necessarily because the site has been burnt, because there's an awful lot of other things that are going on in the sites. But nevertheless, and what's really interesting is that these burnt plots, on the whole, there's a lot of them that have been improving, and the rest of them are stable. The ones where the question mark is where we don't have enough data to really know what's going on. We think that it looks like it's improving, looks like it's stable, but we're not certain. But there was an improvement after the burnt plots, and that included the sort of ACT government style of more normal burns, ecological burns, but also the cool burns that Wally did. Herbaceous weed control, one of them improved in its quality to remain stable. Revegetation remained stable. In other words, revegetation for species didn't actually make very much difference. And again, I'd put that down to the drought. In the drought, those poor plants really suffered. Nevertheless, in the re-veg in the woody species, they were quite stable, and they continued quite well. The no management was interesting because in a lot of cases they still improve, but that's often because those sites, again, like I said, it's a deliberate situation to say they actually don't need a lot of management, and so they improved. So this is the big picture that you get out of the work. I want to also, what was really, really important with all of this was to get feedback from the participants as to how they actually felt about it. Of course, what often happens is that you get good feedback from people who they want to say the right things. So I didn't get an awful lot of sort of really honest answers, but there were some people who did it and just found it wasn't giving them value for their time, or that they didn't have the group support to do it, and were confused by it. So that, of course, is something that we need to consider, because you've got to maintain people's interest in order to ensure that it continues. And so there's 12 plots that have been monitored for a long period of time. 4 were only monitored once and then not done again. And I'm really thrilled. Is Jim still here? I've only got a small number of people here. Is Jim still present?
Yes, he is.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so I was really pleased, Jim, that you're going to be doing your monitoring again, and I'd like to talk to you about that and come along with you if I could, and have a look at that site, because it was interesting. But the overall answer to this was that the people who had either people with really good expertise within their group, or that got help from outside, were the ones that were more likely to want to proceed. Another factor that I think was really important, and it came through with today's talk too, the early talk too, was people have to have a good reason as to why they're doing the monitoring. And I have a feeling that there were some sites that people, and I don't know enough about that to know the answer. I'm not pointing at anybody, but I think that some people sort of set it up because someone said it was a good idea, and they were encouraged to do it. I think what's important is that people go into it thinking, I want to do this monitoring because I want to find out this and that and something else. So it has to be a sort of a personal response. So I think the answer to that is that the training and ongoing support is absolutely critical. So the future of the Vegwatch, first of all, that I showed you that the drivers and also the indicators on that on the principal component analysis, and that allows us to say, well, of those measures that give us very similar sorts of results, what's the simplest that we can do to make it easiest for people to actually apply? And then, but at the same time, we do need to maintain consistency so that it's always done in the same way. The other thing that is we need to get more information collated on the management applied. There was a lot of chasing and people trying to remember, oh, I think this happened here, this happened there. No, I'm not quite sure, maybe it wasn't. So that took a long time to get information on the on the management. And the other thing that comes through is to get information on the disturbance. So if things, it's the rangers here call it a traffic light system. So they're actually, they want to know if there's an orange or a red traffic light. So if there's a massive amount of St John's water all of a sudden, or if someone's seeing pig damage or something like that, that gets immediately sent through to whoever is the land manager, so something gets done. In terms of actually having a future and being supported in the future, and it's only going to work if it gets support of government, because ultimately the key matter with all of this is that it needs consistent project management. Exactly what Karen was saying is that it's not only the technical side of things, but it's the social side of things, so that people actually feel involved and feel like what they're doing is useful. Important also to link with other programs, sharing data and resources, and I've got now a much better relationship with my government, ACT government colleagues, in terms of actually sharing the data with them, sharing resources, which may be ensuring that we're even talking about sort of methodology and how do you measure this, how do you measure that, and I think possibly to actually get it so that some of the work that we do feeds into their immediate programs as well as in a broader sense. I think giving feedback for the information to say the state of environment report, if these data were to go into the state of environment report, then I think that you'd get much more support from the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainability to actually continue the work, and that sort of support from a number of different people is vital as well. And the training to ensure that people are confident with what they're doing is absolutely vital as well, and to ensure that the data are consistent. So we're hoping that the program that will run out this year, the methods will be slightly different. So that's why anyone who continues to do the work, so Jim, it'll be good to talk to you guys. It isn't changed very much. It's actually simpler than it was. Collecting a bit less data and very few guesstimates. Like I was talking about, abundance is always a guesstimate. If you get 5 ecologists together and you say, what's the cover of species in this 1 metre quadrat? So what's the cover of kangaroo grass in this 1 metre quadrat? They'll all tell you different answers, because none of us can do it accurately. You just can't. So I want to take that sort of thing out completely, so it's not an issue anymore. So it's less anxiety for people. So that's really about it. I've sent out copies of the overview to all of the Vegwatch participants. That of the overview of the entire report is available on the website at the molonglo.org.au, although Karen was saying yesterday that that needs to be checked. Is that right? Because it may not.
Yeah, I didn't get to it yesterday, but I'll have a look and see. It should be there, but we need to double check. Yeah.
Yep. And what is incredibly important is acknowledge the people who've put in the time and the work to do the monitoring. If you add up the hours, it's an awful lot. And that they've waited for the feedback on the results, which I hope this report has provided. My fellow ecologists and statisticians have provided me with fantastic advice, and I haven't done any serious statistics for about 20 years, so that really was a challenge, and a few people got me on the right track, and I did a lot more than myself than I thought I was able to do. And then, of course, grants from the ACT government and one from the Capital Region Landkeepers. And so they've supported elements of the program from the inception and various things along the way, and in part the preparation of this report. So that's it from me. If you've got any questions, comments, I'd really like to hear it.
Anyone got any questions?
Yeah, I've got perhaps a comment. We found identifying the species quite difficult.
Yes.
And what we did, or people collected samples where they could and stuck them in plastic bags.
Yep.
Then I asked later on, well, what do I do with these? And they said, keep in the fridge for a while. Anyway, what I did is that I put them through a photocopier.
Yep.
And compiled a book, basically a book, because we had a lot of different species.
Yes.
And got Ryan and Weewinkle to mark it.
Yep.
So, I think we got a pass, but it was probably only a just pass, but we'll be able to use that book as a reference, hopefully next time, to assist with plant identification.
Absolutely, Jim. There's various ways of doing it. I've got oh yes, I'm not expecting you to get the detail, but this is what Rosemary Purdy has done for the Black Mountain monitoring sites there, where they've got their species that they've identified there, and it takes a long time, but she's said to me that I can use those, but to actually collate some of this together, and of course the books themselves, but I think you're absolutely right, Jim, is that it's books and resources like that is one thing, but I think help on the ground, for people to feel really comfortable and to want to continue, that help has to be there. But yes. And it's one reason why I'd like to come out with you, and I can help you there, and get a bit more monitoring on the site, because I think it's an interesting site.
Yeah.
Just coming in on that, the notion of help is obviously funding is the issue, and we have been, and Sarah and I have been talking about this for some time as the review went on, and the review obviously identified the key issue is to getting some sort of way of coordinating the program over time, a bit like, you know, Waterwatch and Frogwatch have a coordinator that help support the people doing, the citizen scientists, as well as making sure things happen and providing the admin and so on as necessary. But there is a couple of, you know, certainly we keep hitting dead ends with finding financial funding, but there is a couple of opportunities coming up. We firmly believe that unless there's a collaborative approach between community and government, then this isn't going to happen. So we're very much focused on getting collaboration between community and government, but also we're looking harder at where there is support in government, particularly the research team, government research team, use the Vegwatch data to as a context for the more specific research that they do. And Sarah was saying that there's an interest in getting some plots set up by volunteers that in areas that the research team are interested in. So there's a few avenues there that if we can really establish a strong connection between what the community is doing and what the government's doing, there may be ways of getting some support. So that's what that's our latest focus, is just how to get that coordinator into play. There is some, as Sarah said, there is she's going to be doing some monitoring this year. There's some likely to do 20 existing sites. Is that right?
Yes, yes. There's a few groups that have continued over the years, and they've indicated that they will continue with their work, which is terrific. And there's a couple of groups that I help to keep them going, and I think that they'll continue as well.
The thing we need to recognise, though, is that Sarah is gradually sliding out. This is a handover process. It's taking some time. It's a transition. We're in transition of handover. So that's why we're very strongly focused on finding a coordinator to keep this going. But we also need to support Sarah as we go through this transition and try to minimise her effort as we can. But we also recognise the value, as we've discussed all day, in the work that you guys do, the monitoring of that work in understanding just the impacts we have is critical. If you guys are going to be monitoring this year, obviously Sarah's going out with Royalla. I don't know about Carolyn, you've got a site out your place, haven't you?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's happening this year.
Well, it's Carolyn. It is a site that I would actually like to come back out to, because after the dry period, to see whether the burn has made any difference. At this stage, in terms of when we've moved into this wetter period, your site is one of the ones of the cool burns that I'd really like to go to, if that's okay with you.
More than welcome, Sarah. I'd be